Does everyone remember, anyone, I should say, we shall, these historical memory tests have been pretty dismal so far. But does anyone remember when the Saddam Hussein statue was getting pulled to the ground?
Yeah, they say that that event was staged by the US military because actually they hire people to go to the square to tear
There's
down.
more to it than that, yeah. But, so you get the impression, if you take it at face value, this is symbolising the destruction of a regime, supposedly the spontaneous actions of a liberated people, etc., etc. You've got all of these things which are meant to be associated with this particular event. However, as you were saying, there's more to it than this, because you actually get to see very little of the square, because what you see of the square is just, you got this little circle of columns, and in the middle of the columns was where the statue was. You did get to see the rest of the square, which is much larger. And though you did occasionally see US soldiers in the background, they were kind of moving around. These were not infantry. These were specifically psychological operations troops. So they've got a very specific function. And the video material which you saw on the news media was produced by these troops. It was not videoed by CNN or BBC or any of the other ones. Additionally, you had the first attempt, when they were about to pull the statue down, you had one American soldier climbing up on the statue and put an American flag around the neck of the statue. And that was quickly taken down. Next question, why would they want to take the American flag off the statue before they pulled it down?
Because they want to represent that the Iraqis free themselves from Saddam Hussein. That's why they put like the Iraqi flag instead of the American.
It would symbolise occupation. Yeah, so as you say, this is meant to seem like an Iraqi thing. So they put an Iraqi flag around the neck before they pulled it down. And then what you don't see, the rest of the square beyond these columns is pretty much empty. Not a single person in it. And the reason for that being, you had the basic defensive unit positions of the soldiers around these columns. You had a couple of tanks, so you had the triangular defensive position. You had one main battle tank on each corner, plus infantry, which were keeping the rest of the square absolutely empty, so that no one could come in to the square. And so they're pulling the statue down, you see all of these people jumping on, throwing rocks, and that was the final bit of the puzzle, which most people don't know about. These were Iraqis, but they were actually brought in. They had been living in the United States as exiles, because the US military considered the local Iraqis not reliable enough to do this particular scene. So they brought these ones in. But if you don't have that exposed, what you see is you see the statue getting pulled down, these jubilant people jumping around on the statue. It looks like something spontaneous, it looks like liberation, freedom, happiness, etc. So, but what you see is not necessarily what you get. And this is where you get the role within these Arab Spring, especially with these actual or attempted humanitarian interventions. And their particular iconic moment is that you get some massacre somewhere. And the idea is, if you get some people killed here, then the government is operating against its people, that outside intervention needs to be done, that this particular dictator must be got rid of in order for a democratic institution to be installed. And so you've got a very specific logic to it. And if you look you can see these are quite often very staged as well. If we look at these ones, for instance in Libya, during the early ones around Benghazi, if you look at a lot of the signs which were being held up in these street demonstrations, they're in English. It's not the local language, I hate to say. So this is not directed at a national or a local audience. This is directed at an international audience. Because if you look at the nature of warfare, it's becoming much more political. It's driven by politics. And these are what ultimately help to define the outcome. Because politics is run by legitimacy, reputation, these kinds of intangible elements. And if you don't have these, for instance, you can't effectively operate, and you certainly can't go and have a just war without legitimacy and apparent public support in order to do so. And so all of these elements come together. And so, as I was saying, you have these signs which are being carried by the people. You had a number of different things in Libya, for instance, which indicate that the high level and role played by propaganda in these particular conflicts, because you had an international media centre run by the insurgents. So it's already indicating what level perception is playing. But this is not the perception of local Libyans, local Syrians. This is perception on a wider audience beyond these countries. And you have a lot of these rather strange arguments which come out, which if you subject them to a greater level of criticism, they don't actually add up. For instance, if we look at the issue of Libya, the Libyan humanitarian intervention by NATO was on the basis that it was protecting the civilian population. What happened? It's understood that this was more or less air support for the insurgent forces rather than being something specifically directed to protecting the civilian population. And one clear example points to this fact. You had at one stage when you had these Libyan insurgents had captured a number of Libyan army tanks and were using them to shell one particular city. NATO thought that these were Libyan army tanks and came in with aircraft and destroyed these tanks. You had a protest from the Libyan insurgents that NATO had destroyed a number of their tanks and they demanded an apology for this. The NATO commander who gave the order for that strike said, and this was in accordance with what the UN Security Council had said, that doesn't matter because it doesn't matter if the civilians were those aligned to the insurgents or those aligned to Gaddafi. All civilians should be protected, regardless of their allegiance. So no apology will be getting issued. This general was fired, dismissed. The next general that came in issued the apology. So it's inferring from this, you can see what this implies, and especially the politicised level of it. So if we, so you have this issue of perception, and you have this legitimacy issue, because you can't say, well, we don't want Gaddafi ruling anymore. We want to get rid of him, and we would like these ones in power because they may or may not be more willing to do what we ask. You can't do this regime change on this particular basis. It has to be put in a more nice way than this, if you want to put it in that particular form.